Welcome to Tigrai Television. I'm Erin Imana. We'll be reading the news for you today. Stay tuned. Tigray External Affairs Office issued a statement on Wednesday congratulating Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus on his re-election as a Director General of the World Health Organization. The office expressed its confidence that the Director General will continue to discharge his global responsibilities with utmost integrity, professionalism, and competence. Dr. Tedros was re-elected to his position on Tuesday, despite the opposition of his home nation that has made several attempts to hinder his re-election despite the overwhelming support from the international community and the endorsement of the African Union. Abil Tsagabu has the report.
The Tigray External Affairs Office issued a statement on Wednesday congratulating Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus on his re-election as Director General of the World Health Organization. The office commended the Director General's decades-long dedication to expanding primary health care, starting from his time serving as head of Tigray's Bureau of Health. The statement also praised the Director General for his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, where Dr. Tedros was able to effect change by encouraging repressive states to share critical information on the spread of the virus with the world. The office condemned the Ethiopian government's repeated attempts to sabotage Dr. Tedros' re-election and said it was being done deliberately to silence the Director General from being vocal on the humanitarian catastrophe in Tigray. The statement also said that the government of Tigray hoped to see the Director General continue to speak for the people of Tigray and maintain his veracity in serving humanity regardless of race, religion, and national origin. Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus was re-elected as Director General of the World Health Organization on Tuesday. Dr. Tedros received 155 of 160 votes, including some of the highest donors to the organization and the African Union.
The Committee for the Protection of the Journalists says that the Ethiopian government has arrested 11 journalists and media workers in the past week alone. In its statement on Tuesday, CPJ called on Ethiopian authorities to immediately release all journalists and media workers to ensure that authorities cease harassing members of the press. Abil Tsagabu has more.
The Committee to Protect Journalists issued a statement on Tuesday calling on the Ethiopian government to immediately release journalists being held by authorities. The committee statement emphasized that Ethiopian authorities had arrested 11 journalists since May 19 alone. The report said these arrests were part of a broader crackdown in the Amhara region that had so far seen the arrest of more than 4,500 people. It is to be recalled that the American Embassy in Addis Ababa had issued a statement expressing concern regarding the detention of journalists and media workers by Ethiopian authorities earlier this week and called on the Ethiopian government to refrain from arbitrarily detaining citizens and follow the process of law. Ethiopia is second only to Eritrea amongst sub-Saharan nations for number of journalists and media workers behind bars, and has seen the murder of 2 journalists in 2021 alone. The Ethiopian government has barred media organizations or human rights groups from entering Tigray in the past year, as it's been working to suppress information on the humanitarian catastrophe in the region.
The Global Society of Tigray Scholars issued a statement commemorating the founding of the African Unity, succeeded by African Union. The society stated its disappointment that the organization has failed to be a voice to the people of Tigray that have been suffering through a genocide. The society called on African youth and intellectuals to say no to state-sponsored violence and called on the world to end the siege on Tigray. Sara Kalali has more.
Global Society for Tigrayan Scholars issued a statement on Wednesday commemorating the 59th anniversary of the formation of the Organization for African Unity, now the African Union, or popularly known as Africa Day. In its statement, the society condemned the African Union's continued silence on atrocities in the war on Tigray and said the organization and its chairperson had failed to live up to the ideals of the African Union that obliged them to promote solidarity and unity amongst Africans. The statement emphasized the failure of Musa Muhammad Faki, chairperson of the African Union, and member states for failing to act as the Ethiopian government, the host of the African Union, has been undertaking genocide in Tigray, and recalled that the chairperson had gone so far as to legitimize the war, calling it a law enforcement operation undertaken to preserve the Ethiopian state. The society called on all Africans, especially youth and the academic community, to say no to despotic governance and state-sponsored violence, including the brutal siege and the humanitarian blockade that is currently starving 7 million people in Tigray.
The formation of the African Union in 2002 was intended to mark the start of a new chapter for Pan-Africanists across the world. After decades fighting against European colonizers, the Continental Organization was going to refocus its objective to support the internal accountability for democratization across the continent. Our reporter Sablork Lama looks into whether these changes have actually occurred and if the Continental Organization is standing by its ideals.
The Organization for African Unity, the predecessor of the African Union, was founded this week in May 1963, with the main aim of securing the independence of all African nations from European colonizers. But in 2002, following the independence of all African nations, African states would find it necessary to reform these objectives to ensure that the Continental Organization would have the mandate to oversee human rights violations and contribute towards strengthening democratic initiatives in the continent. Even then, it was obvious that true Pan-Africanism would need to produce internal checking mechanisms for Africans to hold each other accountable in times of gross violations of human rights. In the mid-19th century, the concept of Pan-Africanism had just started to emerge. The social movement would bring together Black people and people of African origin to work on a common interest of Black empowerment and resistance against European colonialism. By late 1940s, with the independence of many African countries, Africans took the lead in the Pan-Africanist movement. Most important African figures of that moment would become Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, as well as Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, and many more. But the noble cause of Pan-Africanism has often been abused by African leaders across the continent, hoping to escape accountability for human rights violations. The Ethiopian government and the Eritrean regime have been screaming for the mantra of Pan-Africanism over the past year. The Ethiopian government has gone so far as to claim that the silence of some African countries in the face of gross violations of human rights, the use of famine as a weapon of war, and the involvement of non-African states in the arming and financing of the Ethiopian government is a symbol of their African solidarity.
The resolution of our internal matters was made exceedingly difficult by the role played by external actors. I wish to take this opportunity to thank you all for your support, solidarity, and understanding as we underwent these trying times.
Nahusanai Belai, a lecturer of political science at Maqala University, says reducing Pan-Africanism into a relationship between three dictators and their ambitions to escape accountability would be a discretion of the noble cause of Pan-Africanism today.
The African Union was established to foster partnership among and between African people. Pan-Africanism, the very essence of Pan-Africanism is cooperation and unity of the Africans against the challenge of initially it was colonialism, then later it was a unity for development, a unity for further collaborative activities. But what we are witnessing right now is not a Pan-African unity of the people. It's a unity of three unaccountable leaders of the Horn. Therefore, it directly goes against the Pan-African or the African Union's mission of creating a peaceful neighborhood. A relationship between and among the different people of Africa.
But Abiy Ahmed has not only attempted to abuse the concept on Pan-Africanism, but has further and in some instances even taken part in perpetrating anti-Black rhetoric.
በቆየው የአሜሪካ የአገዛዝ ስርዓት ውስጥ በጣም የተጎዳ የሚባል ማህበረሰብ ጥቁርና ጁ ነው። ሁለቱም ተገርፈዋል፣ ተጨቁነዋል፣ ታስረዋል፣ እንዳይሰሩ ሀብት እንዳያደረጁ ሆነዋል። ልዩነቱ ጁ ከሲቪል ራይት በኋላ ትንሽ መብት መታየት ሲጀምር ዘፈኑ፣ ግጥሙ፣ ፊልሙ፣ ድራማ ወደፊት ሆነ። እንዴት ዓለምን ኮንከር ማድረግ እንደሚችል ኢኮኖሚክ ፓወር መፍጠር እንደሚችል ያስባል። ጥቁር ደግሞ እዚህ ላይ ቆሞ ትናንትና ኮገረፉ፣ ገደሉ፣ እንዲያደረጉ ይላል። አሁን ያለው ትውልድ ትናንትና ውስጥ እንዲኖር አደረገው። እነዚህ ደግሞ አሁን ነው ነገ ውስጥ እንዲያስብ አደረጉት። 50 ዓመት አልሞላም ጁ ሀብታም ሆነ፣ ጁ ፓወርፉል ሆነ፣ ጥቁር ነፃ ደሃ ሆነ። ነፃነቱን አግኝቷል፣ መዝፈን ይችላል፣ ግን ደህንነቱን መቀየር አልቻለም።
The choice of African Union to remain silent as Ethiopia, the host nation of African Union, commits genocide against the people of Tigray and continues to withhold basic services from close to 8 million people, is yet another sign that member states in the African Union are yet to live up to the promises of their ideals, and a sign that the African people should take the opportunity on this African Day to reclaim their organization and ensure that it speak on the behalf of all people.
This week marks 31 years since the Eritrean People's Liberation Front marched into Asmara, Eritrea's capital, ending 30 years of struggle for independence. A lot has changed since then. A once promising nation in the Horn has turned into a living hell for its citizens. Today, Eritrea has become the face of oppression and human rights violation across the world. Arbitrary detention, torture, and migration are now synonymous with the East African nation. Salome Tigrai has more.
This week, in 1991, Eritrean People's Liberation Front marched into Asmara, Eritrea's capital, ending 30 years of struggle for independence. 2 years later, Eritreans would hold a referendum to officially declare their independence and gain international recognition as a sovereign state. But today, Eritrea is recognized by the world as being one of the most repressive states in the world, with tens of thousands languishing behind bars, many forcibly disappeared, possibly tortured or killed. Not only that, but the country does not even hold any false promise of democratization, when even after decades of its recognition as an independent state, it is yet to ratify a constitution, establish a parliament, or allow for the establishment of opposition parties, forcing those with opposition to the existing regime to seek refuge thousands of miles away from their home.
ሀገር ብዘይና ህዝባዊ ግንባር ፖለቲካ ካልእ ፖለቲካ ኣሎ ዝብል ሰብ እንድሕር ኣሎ ኮይኑ ካልእ ዓለም ክደሊ ኽእል እዩ።
Okay, now let's look at the domestic political situation in Eritrea. When are elections going to be held in Eritrea? There were elections scheduled for 2001. They didn't take place. When is that going to happen?
What elections?
Elections in Eritrea.
We'll see what the elections in the United States will bring about, and we will wait for about 3-4 decades until we see genuine natural situations emerge in Eritrea.
You're saying Eritrea is going to wait 3 or 4 decades before it holds elections?
Maybe more, who knows?
Well, are you prepared to tolerate any kind of opposition in Eritrea?
What kind of opposition? Agents hired by the CIA from Langley, or opposition from inside, or any kind of opposition?
There was something of a crackdown against the opposition by the Eritreans, by your government in 2001. Journalists were in prison.
Not at all. Not at all. You are disinformed. There has never been any opposition in this country. This is a total lie. And if you're talking about a political process, that is a different matter. If you're talking an opposition that has been fabricated and created by Langley, then you would call that an opposition. I would not call that an opposition.
But decades back, Eritrea had actually been a symbol of accountability and progress in the Horn. Following the defeat of Italy during the Second World War, Eritrea would fall into the hands of the British until September of 1952, when, based on recommendations by the United Nations, Eritrea was federated with Ethiopia, with its citizens having a distinct arrangement that allowed them to exercise rights that other Ethiopians were not privy to, including the right to elect their representatives, the right to establish political parties, and learn and govern in local languages. But just at the eve of Eritrea's federation, Emperor Haile Selassie would start to undermine Eritrea's autonomy and later disband the federal arrangement and close all doors for Ethiopians that had hoped that the arrangement with Eritrea would lead to further democratization for the Ethiopian state. In 1958, Eritreans would start the first organized and armed resistance against the Ethiopian state, demanding Eritrea's independence. That first front would later fragment into 2 organizations, the Eritrean Liberation Front, that retained the legacy of the original resistance, and Eritrean People's Liberation Front, today known as People's Front for Democracy and Justice, the ruling party in Eritrea.
كدمي أستاذ حرور حبيلو أذكر معلم ريفرندم أكايدكم ድሌትኩም እንታይ ምዃኑ ዝጠራጠር ሰብ እንተደኣ ነይሩ ድሌትኩም እንታይ ምዃኑ ኣረጋጊፅኩምሉ ድሌትኩም ነፃነት ምዃኑ ዳርጋ ሙሉእ ድምፂ ክበሃል ዝከኣል መንገዲ ገሊፅኩም ዓለም ሰሚዕኩም ዓለም ተቐቢልኩም ድሌትኩም ሰሚሩልኩም እንኳዕ ድሌትኩም መስመረልኩም ነቲ ዝሓለፈ ዝርስዖን ምእንቲ ክንመሃረሉ ንቑስና ንዝክሮ ምዕንቲ ክንመሃረሉ ግን ኣይንሓኮን ግን ኣይነሰራስሮን ዝሓለፈ ሓሊፉሎ ሓድሽ ምዕራፍ ንጅምር እዚ ሓድሽ ምዕራፍ እዚ ኣብ ቢንቶ መረብ ሓፁር ንሓፅረሉ ይኮነን እዚ ሓድሽ ምዕራፍ እዚ ሓደ ብላዕሊ ሓደ ብታሕቲ ንጠማመተሉ ይኮነን እዚ ሓድሽ ምዕራፍ እዚ ጎኒ ንጎኒ ማዕረ ጠጠው ንብለሉ ሓፁራት ኣብ መንጎ ህዝብታት ዘለዉ ሓፁራት ኣፍሪስና ገዛእትና ዝፈጠርዎ ቁስሊ እንተንምህሮ እምበር ንምሕኻኽ ዘይንዝክሮ ክኸውን እዩ ዝብል እምነት ኣለና
Eritrea's impending descent from a promising nation in the Horn to one of the most repressive states in the world would become evident in 2001 when Eritrea's Isaias Afwerki arbitrarily detained 15 senior members of the leading party and journalists after they questioned his handling of the border disputes with Ethiopia. Not one of these detained, almost 21 years ago now, have been heard from since. But Isaias's ruthless behavior, according to leaked documents, would haunt him. Ronald McMillan, US ambassador to Asmara, would describe the president as paranoid. He believed that both the Ethiopian and US governments were trying to kill him and would switch plates with subordinates to avoid being poisoned and sleep in different locations to escape assassination. An apparently constant and repetitive fear for the president. Political analyst and commissioner in Tigray's election commission, Marasa Tsahaye says, Eritrea's democratization is not only possible but also very much necessary for peace and security in the Horn.
The failure of democracy in Eritrea, the problem of nation building and state formation in Eritrea becomes a problem to Tigray and the Horn. So Eritrea becomes a problem in the regional security complex. So it's better to remove Isaias Afwerki and then support the Eritrean democratic forces to develop their own democratic process. And the international community should actively support Tigray's cause as well as the cause of the democratic force of Eritrea. So the international community has a responsibility to play its role in this regional security framework because the Horn of Africa is one of the hotspots of world geopolitics in world politics.
Eritrea, for much of the past 30 years, has been a symbol of oppression and decay as its citizens have been forced to seek refuge in camps across the world. Its leader, once a promising freedom fighter, turned against his people and ravaged his country. But many still hope the nation will soon rise from the ashes and reclaim its position as a defender of human dignity and make peace with all its neighbors.
Well, that's it for me today. Thank you very much for watching.